Hello, David Daft here. I'm going to be doing my scavenger hunt reflection in video form. So first question, how would you rate the overall condition of social studies in your classroom and school? 0 being awful, 5 being excellent, and what evidence do I have to support that rating? I think my classroom, I was in Norwalk Middle School. My teacher was teaching 7th, 8th grade social studies, which is awesome. That's exactly what I want to teach. I think it was really good. uh, Based on my little T-chart thing with yes or no for different things in the classroom, most of them were yes. The ones that were no were kind of more specific things, like books based on special needs, books on transgender and gender different roles, that kind of stuff. Those are more specific things that I'm not so necessarily think you're going to find in most classrooms. So I think overall, there's a lot of diversity within that classroom, which is saying a lot because the Norwalk School District is majority white. Uh, Within the classroom, I think there were a couple of African American students and then a couple of Latino slash Hispanic students. So to have that much diversity in a classroom, I think is pretty awesome. It's not necessarily something you have to have when you're not very diverse to begin with, but I think my teacher did an excellent job of making sure there was diversity in the classroom, even if there wasn't. Um, like I said, she taught both 7th and 8th grade social studies, and for each one of those classrooms, she had at least 2 books for them. I think 7th grade had 3 books that they could reference. So this gave them different perspectives on things. The books were a little bit different. They contained the same basic information, but they had different stories, more specific details related to different parts of the story, just different aspects of it. It was focusing on. So I thought it was really cool, just having different textbooks that the students could use, and they used them probably a couple times a week. So they got the experience of looking at different resources multiple times a week, which I think is always awesome. Another cool thing she did in the 8th grade, they're teaching American history, and almost every day she would be talking about current events, which is awesome. If you just think about it, American history, a lot of that's going to be directly related to what we're doing now. We were going over, when I was there, we are doing George Washington. We went to the John Adams presidency and eventually the Thomas Jefferson presidency. And she was able to connect the idea of superdelegates and the Electoral College and stuff like that into the classroom. So they were able to understand how that process would work and how it looks like today as well. So I know she spent one day just talking about Super Tuesday when that happened. And I just thought that was a really good connection she was able to make. So they were able to kind of implement current events with history, which is the ultimate goal of the history class, is to show that the things of history are still impacting how we live today, which is actually the overall goal of the social studies program at Norwalk. So I felt she was pretty successful in doing that, and I was pleased with how she just did that overall. Second question: if you were to be hired at that school, list and explain specific steps that you would take in order to contribute to social studies teaching and learning for your students or for the school as a whole. One thing I would say against this school, and I observed a couple classrooms, so it might not be true across the board, but it seemed pretty true for the most part. They like to lecture, and lecture isn't necessarily bad, but social studies has a very negative connotation with a lot of students, that it's just boring and it's not important by any means. And I think it's great. They are attempting to connect history with the present day, which I think they're doing a very good job of doing that. Um, the issue is lecture is not always the best way to teach students. I know for me, I am a visual and kinesthetic learner. Therefore, just being lectured at is going to be very ineffective for me, and that's how they're doing it. Unfortunately, they do have some hands-on activities they do every now and then, but it's kind of disappointing. They don't do as much as I think they should do, and that's one thing I would change, is having a lot more engaging activities. So I know when I was there, I did several hands-on activities. I did a debate. I did implementing a science lesson. We made an Archimedes water screw out of a plastic water bottle and some tubing and duct tape, and that was really good. The students really liked that a lot. And I think activities like that would be one thing I would try to implement a little more, is just allowing the students time to talk. In my English language arts methods class, we had to fill out a teacher reflection for how we taught a lesson. We recorded ourselves for 9 minutes, and one of the things at the bottom of the list was comparing the teacher talk time versus the student talk time, whether it was like you talked for zero of it, or you were talked for 100% or 50% or whatever, and the same thing for the students you'd evaluate. And I was just thinking about it, and I feel like a lot of times in that classroom, if I was evaluating my teacher, other teachers I observed, a lot of times it seemed like it was almost teachers are talking 100% of the time, and they get student comments every now and then, but it was mostly the teacher talking. And I think the ideal scenario, it depends on the lesson you're teaching and the day you're teaching, but ideally I think you want to have it closer to 50-50 in terms of teacher talk time and student talk time. So that's one thing I would try to implement, is just giving the students more opportunities to respond to things and comment. A second thing would be just making sure that students are doing a diverse group of activities. So debates are good, hands-on activities are good, but making sure that there's a good way to kind of use all of those together so that you aren't just using one method. Like lecture by itself is I would say is not a very good method. But if you're using lecture with a hands-on activity, I think that's going to work a lot better to making the students more engaged and just give them really good learning opportunities for them to gain practical knowledge, but also be able to sit down, and the teacher needs to get certain information to the students, and the teacher has the opportunity to do that as well. So those are kind of the two big things I see. I'm sure there's many other things I could list there, but those two are the really big ones that I would want to make sure I emphasized if I was hired at this school. Third question, what kind of citizen do you think is being promoted through these resources, or lack thereof? The three being justice-oriented, participatory, or personally responsible. And this one was pretty easy for me to answer. My teacher really emphasizes personally responsible students. We were talking about Greek democracy. They're actually one of the first people to create a true democracy, and they would have like all their people go in and vote for certain things. And ironically, it was right around the same time we're doing like elections and Democrats, Republicans getting their candidates fixed up and in order. And one thing she said multiple times was, if you don't like a candidate, don't vote for them. You can campaign against them. You can campaign for someone who you think is going to have a chance of beating them. But ultimately, your vote matters because you get to choose who you vote for. And she kind of put the responsibility on them to be informed and educated voters. And they would be taking some responsibility and making sure that the leadership we have, whether that be presidents or senators or Congress or even just mayors or whatever that you get to vote for, making sure that you are informed and that you're taking a role in deciding who that's going to be. So I thought that was really awesome. She definitely emphasized that a lot more in American history, just because it's easier to connect with that, because it's our history. And so she really connected on that, I felt like, with the students really well. And she really voiced this, hey, if you have an opinion about something, voice it. You have the right under the First Amendment to do so. You have the freedom of speech. You have the freedom of the press. You can do those things within reason. And she encouraged the students to do that, to be personally responsible with how they're doing it, which I thought was really good. And then the fourth one, what evidence did I see of ongoing debates related to elementary social studies education? What side were they on in the practicum? Just thinking about that, first one that is on the list, pedagogy. They tend to be more of a fan of direct instruction, which I get that. Direct instruction is effective. It allows you to get a lot of information out to the students, and it's good. I have nothing against direct instruction, but I'm probably more on a fan of the hands-on active teaching. Just that, those are all my lessons were those kind of ones, and I felt like the students were just a whole bunch more engaged in those lessons. Maybe it was because I was teaching and she wasn't. It was something different, but I just sensed that they were a lot more engaged when they did that. So that was one debate that I kind of felt like was in the classroom. Direct instruction was her opinion, which is definitely fine. But mine's more of a hands-on active. And then assessment. I don't necessarily feel like they're full-on standardized tests, but I do know they were doing standardized tests when I was there, the Iowa assessments, which is required for all students in Iowa to do. Uh, but I felt like most of the things they were doing were leading towards a summative assessment, which was a test. They didn't do a whole bunch of projects. Though they did in the seventh grade classroom, they did do an essay, like a DBQ essay, document-based question. They had to do a 5-paragraph essay with that. So that would be one project they kind of did. But most of it, they were leading towards a test. And I personally am a huge proponent of project-based, just because it gives opportunities for students to um, show what their work is. It's not just them memorizing facts and information and then circling it or answering it one sentence and on a test. To me that doesn't really show learning at all. Whereas a project, you can apply your knowledge and it's a lot deeper than just basic recall information. So those are kind of the big two that I saw in the classroom. Other than that, I some of these were more so in the middle. So they were a little more harder to tell which side of them they fell on. With those two, definitely assessment and pedagogy were the two that were probably the most obvious there. But overall, I really liked my practicum. I'm hoping actually to go and student teach there again. Maybe same classroom, but at least the Norwalk schools. I just liked the culture they had there. I felt like it was a good learning environment, and I think I was well received there, and I think most students were accepted for what they were. I know there was one student in my class. She had just transferred there, and she was a homeless student, which is very interesting. I've never experienced a student being homeless before, and I just felt like the culture around it was very accepting of her. They didn't make a big deal out of it. They treated her as a normal student, and she had some behavioral problems and had to deal with those. But I felt like overall they were handled well, and to me that was a really good experience. Just I haven't really experienced a low SES school before. Norwalk's pretty high. My other practicum was in Urbandale, so both of those were more of a higher or middle class SES. So that was a good experience, just interacting with her and getting to experience what she's been experiencing and going through. And she was a hard person to work with, but just opportunities to work with her, I feel like were really fruitful for me, and I was excited for that opportunity. And this opportunity in whole is just a really good opportunity. So really blessed by this opportunity and the experiences I had in this practicum. And like I said, I'm hoping to come back here again, but we'll see how that goes. But that's my thoughts on that. That was my scavenger hunt assignment.